Well, it's finally in our possession. Arturia's MicroFreak, a touch plate 25 key hybrid analog digital synthesizer that packs more features than a lot of synths that you're gonna find in this size. And of course, by hybrid, I'm talking about a digital oscillator, but a true analog filter, which is based on Oberheim's SEM filter. So that means you're gonna be able to create tones that are subtle and round, all the way up to absolute destruction. And speaking of absolute destruction, we decided to come to Bushwick, Brooklyn, New York, to the Brown Note, which is a 5,000 square foot performance space with a Tsunami Bass sound system that can reproduce mammoth sounds all the way down to 5 hertz. Now, there are a lot of really good, super in-depth reviews of the MicroFreak. What we want to do is give you an overview of the synth, let you hear some of the sounds, and tell you who it's good for. One thing I gotta say right away though, right out of the box, before you even get into customization of sounds, there are 160 factory presets, and there are up to 256 presets available, meaning you can store your own. So there's a lot of customization available on this synth. And when you consider that the MicroFreak also gives you an LFO, arpeggiator, envelopes, sequencer, CV and gate compatibility, touch capacitive keys, and a lot more, all for under $300, you realize that this is really a steal. So if you are a producer, a musician, a sound designer, or somebody who just wants to build upon that really great synth library you have, buying this is kind of a no-brainer. What kind of synth is the MicroFreak? Well, it is a monophonic synth, but it does have a paraphonic mode. And when you engage that, you can play up to 4 sounds simultaneously. They're gonna share the same filter, but they each still go to a different VCA. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds between polyphonic and paraphonic. Speaking of sounds, why don't we check out some of the patches right now? You'll notice that next to the OLED screen, there's a preset knob, and all we have to do is turn the knob to the left or to the right to select whichever sound we want. Did you notice that with each preset selection, the lights on the upper left of the synth keep changing? This area is MicroFreak's mod matrix, and it's one of the most useful and powerful features of the synth. The mod matrix is essentially a visualization of how the different patches in MicroFreak are working. As you move through the presets, you get a clear diagram of which parameters are affecting each other. The other thing you can do with the mod matrix is create your own custom routes. If I take an initial or an used patch, you see that the matrix is empty. All I have to do is turn the matrix knob, select a destination, let's say LFO and pitch, and depress the matrix knob to set my choice. Now I know that any changes I make to the LFO will affect the sound's pitch. Overall, think of the mod matrix as 2 different things. 1, a learning tool, so you can see how patches are made and how sounds are created. 2, a way to customize your own patches. Let's move on to the oscillator section, which is really powerful and very distinct in sound. Because the MicroFreak is an open-sourced synth, the bulk of the digital oscillators are based on the Mutable Instruments Platts code, and you get a total of 12 oscillators. all of which are very distinct. There's even a chords oscillator that lets you select from a variety of chord types. Once you choose an oscillator, there are 3 parameters that let you customize your sound even further: wave, timbre, and shape. Of course, anything that is done to the knobs is conveniently displayed on the OLED screen above, so you can really visualize the changes you're making. Next to the oscillator section is the filter, which I mentioned before is analog. Here you get 3 types: low pass, band pass, and high pass. Obviously, you can tweak to your heart's content here, and there's even a dedicated filter knob down in the envelope section for more fine-tuning. To the immediate right of the analog filter is the cycling envelope, which essentially works like an envelope or LFO with variable rise and fall times. An effective way to use this would be to select an initial or unused patch, assign the cycling envelope to modulate a parameter in the mod matrix section, let's say cycle envelope to timbre, then play with your sound till you've found something you like. Next is the envelope section, which shapes overall loudness of a tone and timbre of a sound. The envelope can be routed to any destination on the modulation matrix, including ones you've created yourself. In addition to your standard attack, decay, and sustain knobs, there's a filter knob that lets you dial in how much the envelope will affect the filter, and an amp mod button, which, when engaged, drives the VCA, thus affecting the overall output coming from the synth. Up next is the arpeggiator section, which, when engaged, breaks a chord into individual notes and plays them one by one. There are 4 arpeggiating patterns: up, order, random, and pattern. The first 3 are pretty self-explanatory, but the pattern mode is a bit interesting. It generates new patterns with each new key press, but it tends to emphasize the root of the chord, so low notes will appear more often than higher ones. This is a good mode for live performances, since patterns can't be saved. Once you remove your finger in this mode, that particular pattern stops. You may have also noticed spice and dice buttons, plus a blend button. Spice and dice work hand in hand to alter the gates and triggers of arpeggiators and sequencers. Once you apply them, just slide your finger along the touch strip to engage them, and they'll dramatically change the sonic landscape of your arpeggio or sequence. And of course, bend does exactly what it says it'll do. It'll bend the pitch of your sound. For those of you who dive really deep into the modular world, the MicroFreak may be the controller you've been looking for. Whenever you're in sequence mode, the notes you play on the keys are sent immediately to the CV and gate outputs on the back of the synth. And you would need to use Arturia's MIDI Control Center software to customize your setup based on the gear you're using. MicroFreak can also use its USB port to send and receive MIDI data. And it is possible to use the MicroFreak as a MIDI to CV converter. Just send note data from MIDI tracks on your DAW to the MicroFreak's MIDI in. Hitting Shift and Arpeggiator simultaneously will take you to the MicroFreak's sequencer. And the other arpeggiation buttons now become transport controls for that sequencer. Many of Arturia's preset patches are sequences, and depending on which mode the patch is in, paraphonic or monophonic, the sequence will react in different ways. For example, in monophonic mode, you can play the sequencer almost like a percussive instrument, as the sequence will pause every time you lift your fingers. In paraphonic mode, however, the sequence will keep playing while you engage and disengage the keys. Let's look at the keys, which are one of the most unique features of the MicroFreak. They're essentially touch capacitive circuit boards, so not only do they require that you touch them with your bare hands to produce sound, but you'll also get variations in sound, particularly in terms of pressure and velocity, depending on how much of your fingers are actually touching the circuits. Overall, these keys are really sensitive, which is great, but you kind of need to be aware of where your fingers are, much more so than on a standard key bed. So when you finally get your MicroFreak, what do you get in the box? Obviously, when you open the box, you're getting the keyboard, you're getting a very small quick start guide, and you're getting a power supply. But the good news is the MicroFreak can be bus powered through USB. So whether you're using it with your computer or you're plugging it into a USB hub, even with a separate USB battery pack, it'll work fairly well. However, Arturia recommends that you really do use the power supply to get the best performance out of it, because there may be grounding issues if you're not plugged into wall power. But if you're somebody on the go and you're using this in a live show, or you just want to have a portable system and you don't really feel like bringing power supplies with you, it works pretty much like it would with wall power, but just keep in mind what the recommendation is. Additionally, you get 2 mini jack to MIDI cables, which allow for compatibility with standard 5-pin MIDI cables. This is useful if you're using a bigger external keyboard to control the MicroFreak, or if you're syncing it to another MIDI-capable device to lock in time code, for example. Well, before we go, we really couldn't leave the space without testing the Tsunami Bass sound system. We want to really drive it, so we brought, obviously, the MicroFreak and its brother, or cousin, the Drum Brute. That's it for our overview of Arturia's MicroFreak. As you can see, it's a very capable, very powerful synth in a compact size, and I hope you're able to get your hands on one. Thanks so much for watching. This is AB, and I'll see you next time.